tent reading group read it some time ago, and I highly encourage you to pick up the book. But there's a story in here that fits the theme tonight so beautifully. So I wanted to share that and kind of wrap it around the warm feelings of and the amazing family that has gathered tonight 20 years later. It's really quite astonishing. So the story, there's a picture. It's a kid getting measured on the door jamb by his dad. You know how you did that with your kids and you marked that they grew a half an inch. Okay? So there was no need for clergy. The son organized the service. He had only a few words to say. He had planned to say more, but found it too difficult with the unexpected presence of 3 such men as a conductor, an architect, a spiritual teacher. Each face had graced the covers of national magazines. The mourners at the graveside service had buried a body but opened a treasure chest of shared experience. The 3 guest men sat quietly attentive while friends and family spoke. Stories emerged like pearls one by one until there were enough to make a necklace of memories. The 3 men sat together at the edge of the room, not talking even to each other. Family members and friends of the deceased passed by them on their way out, muttered a few words, and shook hands. Such was their fleeting encounter with greatness. At last, there remained only the immediate family, the 3 men, and still too much food on the table. Right, Adrian? I met your father once, the conductor began. Me too, said the architect, just once. I also, the teacher said, once. He never spoke of it, the son said. Did you meet with him all together? As for me, I was alone with him, the teacher said, looking toward the other 2. Alone also, said the architect. Just the 2 of us, said the conductor. He never spoke of it, the son said. I'm not surprised, the conductor said. It would not be his style, said the architect. The teacher said, I would have expected nothing else. You each met him only once. Something must have happened that each of you should come so far out of your way to attend his funeral. Something happened. An important moment. A lasting impression. The 3 men voiced such thoughts, the words falling upon each other, but the intent clearly understood. We'd like to hear, the son said. Yes, said the conductor. Your father was a remarkable man. You must know that. I know him as my father, was all the son could say. I was with him just once in Central Park on a bench. For 20 years I had removed myself from public sight. You know that? It was at the end of those 20 years I sat next to your father. He began our conversation like this. This is the conductor speaking. I've heard some people have such talent they can look at a score and hear music. It's hard for me to imagine such a thing. I can't do it. The music inside them must be perfect, a perfection beyond anything they might actually bring into the world. The conductor says, it was as if he had looked into the deepest part of my soul and spoken a truth I had never been able to articulate. I acknowledged it, spoke of the pain I had felt in my last years of conducting, that I had never once been able to bring to life the perfection I knew, and so had withdrawn into the music of my mind. Your father allowed some silence and then began with the words, what if? Such powerful words. I will never forget them. What if, he said, you might find still more beauty in imperfection, the wrestling and sharpening of one instrument, sometimes with, sometimes against the other, a work in progress rather than a finished result. It would not be perfect any more than the image of a running stream is perfect. The joy is in the movement, in the rush, always in progress. Not his words exactly, but the conversation was longer, but that's how I've come to remember it. I returned to orchestral work shortly after, and with greater joy than I ever experienced before. Same here, said the architect, if not word for word, concept for concept. I had also withdrawn from my profession. I had every award under the sun. There was no goal left to which to aspire, and the work I had done left me cold because each building had been more beautiful in the blueprint of my mind than in its reality. In the blueprint, each work was exact and precise. In reality, each was marred by its setting and less than perfect in the execution. I had enough sex,
Where did that come from?
I had enough success. At least I'm not spilling the wine this time. Big side joke. Enough money, nothing left for with which to work. So I withdrew and I sat one day on a bench in Central Park next to your father. And he began with just those words, what if? What if you gathered other architects around you to create a setting, not in the image of one alone, but one playing off the other, changing his or her design to reflect and enhance the creativity of the other? Not exactly those words, but that was the sense. Soon after, I gathered a circle of associates. The result is the neighborhoods we have created in recent years. Everyone then turned to the teacher, whose books had once sold in the millions, Practical Guides to Daily Living. I had no choice but to write, he said, for I had the talent to see through knots in the spiritual sense, the places where people had tied themselves up in contradictions, like a musical score to the conductor, like a blueprint to the architect. The patterns of the soul were available to me, so I wrote those books to help others free themselves from self-imposed bondage. But over and over, I saw them use my words to enhance their selves, to imagine they had climbed spiritual mountains, while burying themselves in the troughs of ego. So I, too, withdrew from the world of interaction, seeking only interaction with the divine. Then some years later, I happened to sit by your father on a bench in Central Park. He didn't begin with the words, what if? He began with, I can only imagine. I can only imagine, he said, what it must be like to be accosted everywhere. Such an imposition. Strangers demanding to know some great truth, or perhaps attempting to thrust their truth upon you. It was my situation exactly. So he took care not to address his words to me, but he spoke to the air in front of him, knowing that if he had turned toward me, I would have run away. Your father's talent was greater than mine. He saw the pattern of my soul and how to encounter it in such a way as to make the moment sacred. I had a sense of his holiness and I stayed on the bench beside him. Then he said, what if? What if instead of teaching one's own insights, one learned from the texts of others? Such a person might attract a circle of students willing to learn. Then the energy in the room might move around the circle rather than be directed from teacher to student. I heard his words, but I didn't understand. I told him it was my custom to teach from my heart. I wasn't an academic. I didn't know enough of the spiritual text to create a curriculum and teach with authority. I had misunderstood him entirely. He had not suggested that I teach. He had suggested that I learn. Learning, he said, is not teaching. It would not be your task to be a day ahead of anybody, but rather to be as ignorant as everyone else around the table. By not filling space with your own teaching, you invite participation of others, and that would sharpen and polish not only individuals, but the group as a whole. Those were not his exact words, rather a description of what I have enjoyed these last years with a circle of learners. What of you, the architect turned to the son? We each had but a single encounter with your father, and each encounter was a sacred moment. You grew up with him. Was there any particular encounter you might share with us? Something that redirected your life? I knew him as my father, the son said, not knowing how else to respond. And then he began to cry, struggled to control his tears. I'm crying because I do remember. One occasion comes to mind. He opened his eyes, looked to each of the great men in turn. A simple moment, not as profound as yours. I was 12 years old. I had just returned from summer camp. On the doorway of the kitchen, we kept a record of my height. I had measured myself just before leaving for camp. And then I made a mark above that, the amount I intended to grow in my time away. When I returned at the end of the summer, I measured myself against the kitchen door, and I found myself half-inch below the mark I had set for myself. My father saw how disappointed I was. I told him I had failed, I hadn't grown enough. At first, he said nothing. He looked at the mark I had made. With his thumb, he smudged it out, took a pencil, and marked my real growth. Then he spoke. "You've grown wonderfully well," he said. "Your only failure was you made your mark too high." Those were his exact words. Now every time I reach too high and fail, I adjust the mark. Then from that platform of success, I'm able to reach still higher. I have the sense of Mark as a man like the boy's father. So thank you for sharing your family and your memories with us.